So I will motivate this video with a little example. Let's say you're a website designer and you currently charge 200 per website and you sell 12 websites per month. And now let's say your costs increase and that leads you to raise prices. Let's say to $250 per website. So we know that by raising prices, you're going to increase per unit revenue, as in you're going to make more money on each website, but you've also raised prices, which from last module, you should know that because of the law of demand, you expect to sell fewer websites. So the question is, how many fewer? And then in addition to that, we'd like to know, is revenue going to increase or decrease or stay the same, right? Because we have two competing effects. The increased price per website is increasing revenue on each website sold, but the increased costs or increased prices are reducing the total number of websites sold. So to answer that, we need to introduce this idea of elasticity. And the basic idea behind elasticity is it's a metric for measuring how much one variable responds to changes in another variable. So as this relates to our website example, we'd like to know how many fewer websites are going to be sold in response to an increase in price. For good measure, let's put a formal definition on this. Elasticity is a numerical measure of the responsiveness of quantity demanded or quantity supplied to one of its determinants. So we can measure elasticity of demand or supply, but first we're going to focus on what we call price elasticity of demand. And we notate this with this funny E and a P. So this is elasticity with respect to price. So our elasticity, price elasticity of demand, is going to be defined as the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. And what this does is it measures how much the quantity demanded responds to a change in price. Intuitively, you can think of this as just sensitivity of buyer's demand, right? So when the price changes, how sensitive are buyers to that price change? If they're really sensitive, demand is going to change a lot. If they're not very sensitive, the quantity demanded will not change much. So let's do an example. Here's my demand curve. And let's say we start off at an initial price of P1, which corresponds to quantity demanded Q1. And let's say price increases to P2, which corresponds to a quantity demanded of Q2. And let's say this increase represents a 10% increase, and this change in quantity demanded is a 15% decrease. In that case, our elasticity of demand is going to be the percent change in quantity demanded, which is 15%, over the change in price, which is 10%. Right? We can also write this as 0.15 over zero point 0.1, which is 1.5. So the way we interpret this number is we say And the way we interpret this number is we say a 1% change in price results in a 1.5% change in quantity demanded. And one more point to add, if you'll notice, our change from Q1 to Q2 does not have a negative sign, even though the quantity demanded decreased. We dropped the negative sign because we're not concerned about the direction. All we care about is magnitude. So when you're calculating elasticities, if you have a negative sign on a number, intuitively, you can just drop it. Elasticities should always be positive numbers. Now, if you don't already know the percentage change, as I gave you in the last example, doing so is fairly straightforward. There are a handful of ways you can calculate percentage change. What we're going to use in this class is called the midpoint method. And the midpoint method defines the percentage change as the end value minus the start value, all divided by the midpoint times 100. However, we also need to do a calculation for the midpoint, and the midpoint is an average essentially. So it's 1/2 times the sum of the start value and end value. So putting those together, our percent change is going to be end value minus start value divided by 1/2 times the start value plus end value, and then all that times 100. So let's do that for our original website example. If you recall, at $200, we were selling 12 websites. And let's say when you raise the price to $250, you sell 8 websites. So first, let's calculate our percentage change in price, which is going to be the end value, which is 250, minus the starting value, 200, all over 1/2 times the sum of these two, times 100. So that's going to equal 50 over 1/2 of 450 times 100, which in turn equals 22.2%. And then we need percentage change in quantity. And applying the same formula, we have 12 minus 8 over 1/2, 12 plus 8 times 100. And once you go through all those calculations, you should get 40%. And then finally, elasticity, price elasticity of demand is going to be percentage change in quantity over percentage change in price. So 40 over 22.2, which is 1.8. So we'll stop there for this video. In the next one, we'll look at what determines the price elasticity and why some goods are elastic and others are not.